Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And we have a lot of you online today listening. Thank you so much for attending and being here. I just want to say that I welcome questions. I hope that you have lots of them and you're able to raise your hand and interrupt and talk about it. And, I'm happy to answer questions as we go. We'll also make time, and I'll be pausing at certain times and saying, hey, does anybody have any questions? So that you guys can raise your hand and ask questions. And because as much as you participate in this and ask questions, the more I'll know and we'll know as speakers as to how to respond to you and how to answer your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. This seminar is about construction defects associated with school projects. Part of the seminar is copyrighted. However, if you need permission to distribute this seminar to others, we can make that happen and make it possible. Just ask for permission and we'll provide you PDF copies and make it available for you to actually use for your own use, for limited use. Rachel has introduced myself and Ritchie, and I'll tell you a little bit of background on myself. I used to work for a roofing and waterproofing company when I was going to college, and I needed the money. I was going to civil engineering school at Santa Clara University, and after I graduated, I got a job at Turner Construction Company, and I said, God, I'm done with this roofing and waterproofing, messy, dirty business. And I wanted to get out and get into the real professional world of, construction. And what I realized is that the information I had gained as a kid in college in the trades was very useful as a contractor, working for a contractor. And a lot of people older than me and much more senior would reach out to me and ask for my advice. And I realized that I had something special. I should build on it, and I did. So I went back to go work for that roofing company after a couple of 3 years with Turner Construction. I ran operations and learned more of the trade and understood the trade. And and when I started this company in 1987, it was more about a trade engineering firm that did trade expertise. And part of my trade expertise was water intrusion for any fabric, any area of the building. And that meant that the buildings were built wrongly and water was leaking. That's what I specialized in. And so our firm got started in 1987. We're still in business. We're one of the largest in the country doing this type of work. Ritchie Lipson works for a law firm, Kasdan, LippSmith, Turner, and they are one of the largest construction defect lawyers, and they've assisted many different people, including homeowners association, as well as commercial clients, municipalities, school districts, and universities in the construction defect arena. So he is a very experienced attorney that can guide you and answer your questions related to how it affects bond measure projects, and how you need to use this information to your best use. ABB, the company that I started 33 years ago, we've done over 12,000 projects. We are a multidisciplined architectural engineering firm. We have civil engineers, mechanical engineers, structural engineers, architects, but really we are more about building buildings properly, sustainably, long-lasting, figuring out what's wrong with it, doing a forensic analysis, looking at malfunctioning buildings or buildings that are not performing as well as they should from a water intrusion standpoint or from a mechanical engineering standpoint, like HVAC, plumbing, and we figure out a solution and we go implement it. Now, some of these projects happen to go into construction defect. About 15%, 10 to 15% of our revenue is derived from construction defect type of work. And the rest of it is really more about helping clients like you in solving their problems and solving their needs. So we have a lot of community colleges and academic clients. Our offices are throughout the West Coast and California and Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, and in the East Coast in North Carolina and Texas. So we're spread all over the country, and we do a lot of work for many, many school districts. So that's enough about me and my company and our company. I'm going to talk mostly about this presentation, which is the 10-year implied warranty on public bond projects, any kind of construction projects, really. But the public bond projects are very important. I've talked to a bunch of people, including a law firm in Michigan, that all they did is do bond measures for people and got the funding from public records, from New York, Wall Street. And so their goal was to getting funding. And I said to them, I said, unless these people realize that you've spent a lot of public's money on billions of dollars of the bond projects, there's a 10-year implied warranty on all of it. And unless the facility managers, the chancellors, the facility directors, unless they understand what they are holding in their hands, they may lose this implied warranty that comes with these projects. So it's a really, really important perspective to understand that you have some amazing rights as a public entity, and how you should be aware of it. And if need be, you can exercise this right to make your buildings better if there's a problem. So that's really what this is about. That's what we're going to talk about is this whole implied warranty. But what I'm going to do to talk about it is I'm going to give you real life examples of public projects that we have done, and and to go through a whole project cycle, a couple of project cycles. In fact, I'm going to show 2 projects that we have recently done, and talk about what the issues were, what the resolutions were, how we came about with the resolutions, and then the legal side of things is something Ritchie is going to talk about and address. So essentially, there are often the public entities have insurances like owner carried insurances, OSIPs or CSIPs that they purchase. And sometimes these policies are like $30 million, $100 million, $200 million policies. And these policies are worth a lot of money. So the contractors' insurance is consolidated and if that's the case, the contractor's insurance is consolidated into a owner carried insurance. And the contractors will often just provide a 1-year warranty, and the implicit warranty is that, hey, for 1 year, we'll agree to come back and fix something that's broken. But in reality, there is a 10-year implied warranty. Now, the exact law and the exact code of the law as to what makes this an event that's good for up to 10 years, I'm going to let Ritchie talk about it, because there are nuances to this law. If you know something is bad, then you have 1 year to work on it. If you think that there's a question somebody's asking about implied. What do I mean by implied warranty? So implied warranty is where the California law says that if somebody builds something, a contractor builds something, and it causes damage to you as an individual that's working in this building or occupying the building, or damage to the property itself, that contractor is liable. And that liability goes for up to 10 years, okay? That's what the law says. So the law doesn't say that there's a warranty. Law simply says that contractor's on the hook for 10 years. If contractor builds something wrong and does something wrong and it causes you damage, it's good for 10 years. For up to 10 years, you can go back to him and say, fix it. You built this, you caused the damage, and it's going to take $5 million to fix this damage. you're on the hook. The insurance company is on the hook to fix it. So that's what I mean by implied warranty. So the word warranty is not used, but it is implied. So that's a good question. If anybody else has another question, please ask. But did I answer your question? I hope. The other thing that is implied in here is bonding. Bonds are very powerful. Bond means that not only the insurance company is on the hook, the bonding company is on the hook, and they're separate entities, and they have separate liabilities. And a bonding company's liability could add or augment an insurance liability. So there are lots of mechanisms. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to sort of skip this. I'm going to let Ritchie really dig into this issue and talk more. But I wanted to kind of bring it up because it's an important thing to understand. And and there's case studies that I'm about to go to depict these that involved bonds, that involved insurance, and involved all of these things. So this particular, the common type of defects we see in new construction are water leakage. That's probably the number one. 70 to 80% of the time, it's water leakage is the issue. And so the remaining 20% of the time, it's air conditioning issues, it's cooling and heating issues, it's comfort issues, it's condensation, it's fire suppression system, that is not built right. The hot water or cold water delivery systems. So a lot of them are functional things, but the things about leaks are the leaks get hidden. And often a building fabric leaks, the water gets soaked into the walls. The water gets soaked into the ceiling assemblies. You don't see it on the inside. You look at the building and go, I don't have any leaks, but the facade is leaking and the water is staying contained in a wall cavity. You open a wall cavity, it's full of mold, so it's something that you have to really look for. It's not always obvious. And I'm gonna talk about this. This case is one of those where it's a community college, and it's a college that's newly built from a bond project. It's been leaking. It was probably leaking from the day it was built. And because the issues didn't change, the windows were leaking and the walls were leaking, and those leaks were going concealed behind the wall cavity, and most people would not even actually see it. And we'd gone through a big drought cycle, as you recall. This project was completed in 2017. In 2018, 2019, we had a drought going on during some of those times. Actually, the project was not completed in 17. I'm sorry. This project was completed in 2012, 2013 timeframe. This is a typo. But it was not until 2017 that somebody noticed that there was a problem. So it took 5 years after the project was built that somebody noticed that it was a problem. And so we're gonna talk about it because it cost $12 million plus to fix it, and most of it had to do with water intrusion. And it's not a huge building; it's maybe a $35 million construction cost, or $40 million construction cost. I forget what the cost of construction was, but it took almost 25% of construction cost to fix it. So it's very significant, and it's important to understand. Here's the inside. And some of these punch windows were leaking, and water was actually collecting in these wall assemblies, and frankly nobody really realized it. And it was not until certain rains and certain wind-driven rains that people even discovered that there was some level of water intrusion, and they brought this to our attention in 2015, which was a few years after the building was built. And so there were some leaks that were observed during a very heavy rainstorm. In 2015, I think we had a very heavy wind-driven rain that happened in January. And during that January or December rainstorm, it was December. It was December 22nd, 2015, when during that rainstorm, there would happen to be somebody walking through there, and they saw wetness, and they put some protection down, and they took some pictures of leakage that were actually, they could see water coming through. but there was, because of the wall coverings and all of the sheetrock and insulation in the walls, these walls appeared to be all dry. Nobody really knew the extent of the damage. So we were sent out in December to go look at the leakage. And carpets looked dry visually; we couldn't pick it up. But when we put a infrared camera to it, you could see the dampness. You could see all the water that was accumulating on the carpet that we could pick up through our infrared camera. And so people put, you can see they put the caution signs up, and the carpet, you could kind of sort of see where there's a damp spot in the carpet. And when we put a moisture sensitive strip on the carpet, it lit up. We knew that this was really wet, and you could touch it and you could feel it. But this type of carpet really hid the moisture well. And, when we had some small rains, nobody could really tell. And it took years for this issue to even get discovered. As with heavy rains, we started noticing some damage at the ceiling level, in the corner of the ceiling. We even saw some damage on the ceiling tiles. And that was in this one particular area where we actually had water underneath a podium or an entrance plaza on the second floor. And underneath that entrance area, we could see some ceiling damage. So the district hired us to figure out what was going on. And part of what we did is we did a visual, we looked at what was wrong. We also did some water testing. And so we basically, we looked at this from a water intrusion perspective and to see why the water was actually intruding in here. And we ran negative pressure testing. And the negative pressure, we were able to see if there was a leakage through the product, or if there was leakage through the wall assembly, or what. And we could tell that some of the leakage was specifically coming from the product itself. There was product itself that was leaking, and there was water coming in the mid intermediate mullions, and you could see water coming down the wall through the window mullion. So we put together a leak damage summary, and we identified every window, and we did some testing to see where the windows were leaking, if there was sheetrock damage, if there was historic staining, and what the leak history was in different areas. We also did a spray test at different test pressures at 2.5, 4.18, 5.33 PSF, and 6.44 PSF. We wanted to see at what point these windows would leak, because sometimes these windows would leak during a heavy wind-driven rain, and some of the windows would not leak. Some of the windows leaked all the time, and some of them only leaked under a certain amount of wind pressure. And as you can see from this row here, this particular window did not leak at no pressure, but it started leaking at some pressure. And this particular window, window W3W, did not leak under 2.5 pound pressure, but it leaked under 4.18 pound pressure. So windows are designed to resist wind-driven rain, and the test pressures essentially is how you determine where you have wind-driven rain. Any questions about this? Okay. So essentially, the project, we also did some destructive testing. We removed portions of the stucco and looked at inside to see if there was damage. We did find some damage, and there was some rusted flashings. There was water intrusion that we could see behind it, and we looked at different conditions that were leaking, and the amount of damage was categorized and and documented. You could see that this is a soffit condition. There's water that's been coming in and collecting at the soffit. There's a lot of rust. There's a lot of fasteners that are rusted out. There's a lot of water accumulation here taking place. And on the inside, you could see, once we opened up the sheetrock, that there had been some mold growth, and there had been some water intrusion that was happening underneath the windows and accumulating in the wall cavities. So all of the sheetrock that was affected and biological growth had to be removed and cleaned. So we looked at different conditions that were leaking, and this is a sunshade panel that was connected to the building there where water was intruding through there. And there were some other non-water intrusion type issues that were documented, like cracking and peeling paint or intimicid paint, which is a fireproofing type of paint. And so it's important enough to make a note of and to repair. So we went through and made a list of issues and basically said, okay, here are the things that are causing leakage. Here are here's a list of defective construction that we were able to assemble. And we use this just so we can assess a claim. We can go back after to the insurance company and see if we could get that money from them. And part of it is that the other experts, the experts that the insurance company hires, they want to see if this claim is real and what's wrong with it. So this is an example of the type of a list that we would put together based on the investigation, and a list of window issues that you would put together for part of the claim. I'm not going to get too far into it or even talk about what's the name of the project. Some of you might recognize the project, but this is really more educational than anything else. And so I'm not going to get into too deeply into specifics of the project. So somebody had asked if there is a window warranty relative to the pressure. Let me answer that question. So windows are designed and labeled and tested. And the architect may say, hey, I want a window for this project that's going to meet 8-pound wind-driven rain requirement, 8 PSF wind-driven rain requirement. And it's going to resist 30 pounds of structural pressure from the wind. So the architect puts that in the specs. The contractor is not required to build it. Now he may submit a window that not only meets 8 pounds, he may submit a window that meets 12 pounds. So it exceeds the architect's requirement. Or submit a window that meets the 8-pound requirement. So that becomes the basis of what the performance of the window is. It's like saying I have a beam can handle 2,000 pounds of weight. And that's what the beam is designed to do. So if you want to test it, you should test it at, let's say, 2/3 of that pressure to make sure that it can hold up. And so you test it at that pressure. The industry says that for windows, you typically, in the field, you test it at 2/3 the published pressure that the manufacturers publish. So when we did our testing, we didn't test anything beyond the 2/3. I think these windows were designed for 8 or 10 pound pressure. And I think the highest pressure we tested it for was 6.7 pounds or something. And so essentially that's how you test the window. So the warranty, I mean, again, the warranty the manufacturer gives are limited. Their warranties might say, hey, if there's a leak and if you can prove it, you go through these steps to prove it, yeah, maybe I'll come out and do something about it, right? But they're not going to fix the damage. They're not going to fix any of the mold that might have grown or the carpet damage or interior damage or shutting down the project or any of the loss of use. So the warranties that you get from the window manufacturers are really, really weak. So that was one of the questions that was asked was, did the window product have a warranty relative to the pressure? So thank you for that question, and I hope I answered your question. So essentially, the decision was made based on what we had found on how to fix the building, and portions of the buildings were demolished and windows were replaced and flashings were replaced. Windows were actually repaired. And the goal was to fix the windows as opposed to replace them. But I think in the end, it became impossible to repair them and they got replaced because it was just not practical to fix them. But some of the windows that can be disassembled and reassembled, often they're called storefront style windows. those windows can often be repaired if they start out as being good windows that have the proper wind-driven rain resistance. And so we always look for the least expensive way to repair things. And so here's some of the defects that we saw and some of the repairs that had to be done. So initially we were thinking about repairing the windows, and if we were, this is what we were going to do with it. And so they deglaze it, remove the existing gaskets, cut out interior primers and sealant joints, and reassemble them, reseal them properly, and reinstall them. And so it was basically a reinstallation and repair of the window was the original scope of work. And then as far as some of the other items were concerned, you know, there was scopes associated with sunshade panels, with stucco, with sealants, with paint, with some parts of the roofing, the plaza deck. You know, all of these had to be addressed. And we had investigated all of them. We repaired, you know, there were repair descriptions given for all of them. And we prepared a set of construction plans for the repair. It required DSA approval, and DSA provided an approval. The district went through a public competitive bidding process. So they competitively bid the project out, and we assisted with a couple of pre-bid conferences. The bids came in, wherever they came in over $12 million to fix it. And the district chose to really proceed with the start of construction before the project was settled, and a settlement had taken place with the insurance company. At this point, this case did settle. The district got the money in settlement. It's confidential. I'm not going to tell you which district it is. I'm not going to tell you what building it is. And so I just wanted to use this project as an example of, you know, what the process looks like, rather than get into, I'm not going to talk about specifics about any district. I'm not going to talk specifics about any particular building. If you happen to recognize it, great. But that the object here is to really teach without disclosing any potential secrets about the project. All this information that I've given you is public information. These are public projects. You can easily find them, and so, you know, I'm not giving out any kind of secrets, I hope, for anybody. Any questions before I move on to the second project? Because I know there was one reader that had questioned about, you know, I think they recognized the building, and they were asking about, you know, whether we had seek permission. And so what I want to, you know, tell them is that, you know, please, if you know the building, keep it confidential. I'm not looking to disclose it to anybody. And I really want to teach and talk about, you know, examples without getting into any particular, you know, names of people or anything that is non-public. Because most of this information that I'm showing you, all of this information I'm showing you is public, and you can get this through public sources. And my goal is not to really reveal anything that is not public information. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So for my second example, this is a performance arts center, and that was leaking. It's a new college, or, you know, it's a higher education facility. I'm just going to say that. And the funding sources, the cost of repair on this was over $24 million. And it's an auditorium, 106,000 square foot facility. It had a lot of issues with the exterior skin issues that was leaking. There was glazing and curtain wall leaks. There was some roofing leaks. There was water intrusion from, you know, slab on grade. There was a lot of different issues. When we first started, when we got hired, it was for just one thing, that they had some minor leakage through the exterior facade. Some of the facade stone veneer were leaking in certain areas, and that's all they could really detect. And so that's what was looked at. But as we got involved and the investigation and negotiations with the other side took years, that we were able to basically find and see that there were many other issues. There were balconies up above that were leaking. There were curtain wall the curtain wall actually wasn't leaking originally. 5 years or 4 years into the building, the curtain wall started leaking. We just happened to be still on the project investigating other things. And brand new curtain wall leak showed up, and we investigated and had to do with shrinking gaskets for curtain wall. The common thread between this project and the previous project that I gave you was the gaskets actually shrank on both of those projects. And the gaskets take a few years to shrink. And once the gaskets shrink, the window system starts leaking. And so this was another case. This was one of the first cases that we saw. Actually, this is an older project that where the gaskets were shrinking and leaking. And today we see this defect pretty common. And this also had some sunshades. There was some issues with some sunshades as well. So some similarities. But the stone veneer walls was the main issue with the project, and the veneer walls were leaking. This was essentially a cement board that was installed over metal studs, and the cement board was then covered with a latticrete type of a waterproofing membrane, which was not properly installed, not installed per the manufacturer's recommendations. And then they thin set tile right over it, just like you would do in a bathroom. So essentially, you have a very thin paint-like coating that's serving as a waterproofing on cement board, and then you thin set the tiles right on top of it. Fortunately, our issue wasn't that the tiles were falling off. The tiles actually were adhered very well. The issue was that it was leaking, and the waterproofing behind this veneer was the issue. I welcome your questions. Some of you are asking questions through chat, and please continue to do so. And I'm going to pause just for a second to ask people if they have questions. Please raise your hand, and feel free to ask questions. Okay, no questions yet. So I'm going to keep going. So here we are water testing the facade. And we're basically putting a spray rack, which is an ASTM standard testing protocol called ASTM E1105. So the 1105 allows for these tiny nozzles to be installed, the wind water sprayed in a certain pattern so that it's uniform, and then the water just hits the wall. The actual spray is very gentle. Doesn't force water, but there's a lot of water sprayed on the wall, a lot of water. Most of it just runs down the wall. And it's a simulation because some of these tests only take 15 minutes to make. And Mother Nature can unleash rain on this building for days, weeks sometimes. But the test is usually for anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 or 3 hours. So we can't simulate the whole rain, but we can put enough water on it in a certain prescribed manner to simulate the leakage. And sure enough, when we did that, this is the backside. You can see that this is the metal stud walls. On the metal stud walls, you have a cement board, and you can see how those cement boards getting wet on the back of it. You can see rust forming on the back of it. You can see that there's leakage that is occurring through it, and you can see the water speaking down certain penetrations in certain locations where there's windows and pipes and other things that penetrate. But there's also water coming right through the joints in the cement board. And when the waterproofing was applied to the cement board, what they really needed to do is to double up on the waterproofing at the joints in the cement board. It's supposed to put thin set over the joints in the cement board and smooth it out. And then B is supposed to put a mesh and an extra layer of waterproofing at these joints so that, when these joints move, you don't get the waterproofing membrane to split. But the waterproofing membrane as a whole wasn't installed properly. And there was nothing we could do about it, but that's what was leaking. The other things we saw were, once again, there were problems associated with the window itself. How the window was assembled, and there were joints that were open, there were panels that were open, and water was getting through them. And like before, we saw water intrusion that historically been taking place. Now here, this wall cavity was filled with insulation. We took the insulation out of it, and after taking the insulation, we could see the mold that was growing on the backside of the walls. Without removing, in fact, when we picked this window, we didn't know this window was leaking. We had no idea. All we were doing is just randomly selecting windows. We were randomly selecting locations that didn't even have any previous leak history. Nobody had informed us that they had experienced a leak. But we randomly wanted to check the whole building. Now that we knew that portions of it were leaking, portions of it that we could see were leaking, we wanted to see, well, how extensive was it? Let's go look under windows. Let's go look adjacent to a deck, or let's go look adjacent to where the curtain wall meets the wall. Let's go look at the roof interface with this stone veneer, right? So you look at all the conditions to see, hey, is this problem localized or is this problem pervasive? So during the process of really looking at different areas of the building, we saw that, yeah, here's a head of a storefront, and we're destructively testing this. We don't know if there's a leak in here, but sure enough, we find that there was signs of water intrusion. You can kind of see all the rust, that the sheet metal flashings have rusted out. We could see that there was water staining and evidence of water intrusion into the wall assembly, but a lot of the water that leaks in soaks into the insulation. And it never manifests itself inside, okay? And so you can't go on an assumption that the building is watertight just because you don't see a puddle inside the floor. If there's no water, liquid water sitting inside the floor is not a reason to believe that the building is watertight. Turned out that this building had quite an extensive amount of leaks, And when I mentioned about curtain wall, these leaks actually took a few years to start. And once again, it was a high wind, a 30-mile-an-hour wind that was hitting the curtain wall directly that caused this leak. This curtain wall did not leak under normal rain. You could go through weeks and months of normal rain, it wouldn't leak. And you get a high wind-related storm, and only in a high wind-related storm would it actually leak. So this was brought to our attention that leaks were found. Owners took pictures of it. The owners sent us pictures, and we then investigated it. And we actually went out doing rainstorms. When we knew there was going to be wind-driven rain, we went to the site, and we basically would then take pictures of water intrusion that we could see that had now sprung up in the curtain wall assembly. Now that we knew the curtain wall assembly was leaking, we did full extensive water testing. We set up spray chambers, we did full assembly, and to figure out why it was leaking. We've got some questions. Let me read the questions. So there's two questions. One of them is, how was the membrane installed incorrectly? The second question is, would a thermal scan from the interior have shown evidence of additional leaks and moisture, as in the last case? Very, very good questions. It turns out that the membrane was too thin. Okay, that was the defect number one. Membrane was, I believe, I'm going by memory, I believe it was supposed to be either 12 or 14 mils in the field, and it was supposed to be doubled up and reinforced in the joints. So the doubled up and reinforcing was missing, and the membrane thickness was between 3 and 5 mils. So the membrane itself was installed at less than half its required thickness. And as you know, cement board has little holes in it, little gaps in it, and you can't bridge those things with a very thin membrane. You're talking 3 mils is about how thick your paint is. Okay, a normal paint on a house is about 3 mils. So the waterproofing membrane needs body, it needs thickness, so it can stretch over cracks it could fill voids. And if you don't have the right thickness, it's just not going to work. So we had actually a multitude of issues. And at the end, later on, I have a list of issues that were found. Just like the previous example, I have a list of issues. I'm happy to show them in more detail. The second question was thermal camera. And yes, we used a thermal camera on this project during the entirety of the investigation. The thermal camera was useful. And however, the thermal camera did not detect majority of the water intrusion that was captured in the wall cavities. As you can see with this picture, the wall cavity here is a double wall. Okay, there's a stud wall sitting right here on the outside. There's a huge depth and a huge gap. And then the second stud wall sitting on the inside, like 1.5 feet away. And all of that 1 foot, 2 foot of space is filled with insulation, okay? And we couldn't see a thing with the thermal camera from the inside. Surprisingly, when we put the thermal camera on the outside, we were actually able to see where the water was getting trapped behind the stone on the outside. And once the surface of the stone dried after the water test, and the sun, sort of went down and it was no longer shining directly on the stone, we looked with the thermal camera and it would light up. I don't have those pictures with me, but the thermal camera was very helpful in showing us that water gets trapped behind the stone veneer, okay? If you look closely up here, you can kind of see that there are pockets of thin set adhesive that haven't completely flattened out, okay? This part's flattened out, this part has not flattened out, okay? You can see the pattern of the trowel marks, okay? So these areas become areas where water can collect. So when water gets behind the grout joint, it gets behind the tile, it just stays standing in this pocket. We could see that with a thermal camera. And I imagine this whole tile is filled with water. Water is not leaking out either because the grout is holding it in place. And it's not traveling very well laterally, vertically in the wall cavity. So it's staying contained in pockets. So you have a 6-inch, 8-inch high pocket of water. That's 6 to 8 inch of hydrostatic head that's forcing its way into the building through a waterproofing membrane that's only 3 or 4 mils thick, okay? So that was the mechanism. I think that had there been no voids behind the stone and water was just cascading off the waterproofing, it might have done okay. We might not have seen the level of damage and the water intrusion we actually saw. But with the pockets that we saw behind the stone, it was a different story. So I hope that answered your question. Any other questions? We love questions. Okay. So moving on to curtain wall, as I was, here's another thing that we saw, okay? And someone brought this to my attention that they'd also seen some water down here. And so we looked at it, and what we saw is that there's water staining. You can kind of see the outline of the water staining right through there. And this white thing is sort of doing an outline of where the past stains have been. So we first thought that the window wall must be leaking, right? So this is not a curtain wall, this is a window wall. We put a spray rack, and we actually, first thing we did, we flooded the outside. We didn't put a spray rack in first. We just flooded in the outside. And when we flooded the outside and put a hose, not flood, but just put a hose and let water just run on the outside, that water leaked under the storefront, came right in. Then we sealed those areas and we put a spray rack to see if the window wall itself was leaking. And it turned out it wasn't. The window wall itself was not leaking. It was only the interface with the window wall to the slab that was leaking. And there was no curve between the inside and the outside. The inside and the outside are about the same height, and water was able to just laterally move in. And in some cases, what we saw is that the slab edge would get wet, And the slab edge would then transmit water through cracks, even though liquid water wasn't showing up here. You know, you can see a sealant joint on the back. So liquid water was being held back by the sealant joint, but nonetheless, these cracks that were the slab edge cracks were picking up water, and the water was filling up these cracks and coming through these cracks. So here, some of the, then the first thing is, once again, we go through and thoroughly document the leaks that we can see, and we can either see through a thermal camera, we could see visually, we could see some staining, and we were able to document 167 instances of water intrusion that we had to carefully look for. A few of them were brought to our attention by the owners as they started happening, and by the district, I would say, not the owners, but the district. But we went through very thoroughly and we looked for them, and we found all of these locations. We made a map of these locations, and you can see from the blue dots, where these leaks were concentrated on. This is the upper floor plan. The upper floor had, again, very exposed window walls and curtain wall, and the curtain wall leaks were identified in blue. So at this point, the curtain wall was just leaking like a sieve. At first it was watertight. The gasket shrank, and then it just started leaking like a sieve. As time went on, Mother Nature was causing a ton of leaks. And the resolution was that this particular subcontractor felt that he had received improper, poor quality gaskets from the manufacturer of the window wall and curtain wall system. It's an American curtain wall manufacturer. If I gave you their name, you would all recognize their name. I'm not going to give you any names. But the point was that they reached out to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer simply said, no, not our problem. You must have done something wrong. The glass you put in must have been too thin, and so it doesn't properly provide the gasketing, and we didn't supply the glass, you did. It's your fault. And we knew that was not the case. We knew that there was shrinkage happening. This particular subcontractor, I was so impressed. He took it on himself to go out and remove all of those gaskets. They coordinated with us as to what they were replacing it with. They gave us submittals and shop drawings for the new gaskets and the new sealant joint that we're going to put in. And the district gave them permission. They went through and we put in all new gaskets, both inside and out, and put in all new sealant joints. And the leaks completely went away. And they independently pursued the manufacturer to get reimbursed for the cost they had incurred. But out of their own pocket, they incurred over $1 million worth of expense just to seal the curtain wall. And that was, again, a resolution for the district. The district was very happy that their leaks went away. But there were, at this point, a lot of obvious leaks from the curtain wall. So originally, here's the resolution of how this happens, right? The district pursues a claim against the bonding company. This district chose to do this because their legal strategy and their lawyers, and I'm not a lawyer, and you can ask Ritchie when he gets on as to what his opinions are. But this district chose to pursue this only against the bonding company, and the bonding company has so much pressure because they have to fix this. This was a new enough construction, and so they hired us to perform the forensic testing and to do the reports. And once we did the testing, a lot of the other experts got involved. They all appeared at the job site. They all saw our testing. Everybody was able to see what was going on. And based on our observations, we prepared construction documents. Originally, we thought we're going to get this done through outside contractors. And so we got contractors to bid on this work. And I want to say that the construction was in excess of, the cost of repair was in excess of $24 million. Today would have been, this was more than 10 years ago. This is an older project. Today, that cost would have been probably over $50 million. The cost of construction has really gone up. And so the bonding company and the contractor agree that bonding company agreed to fund it through the insurance. Bonding company all got together, they funded it. And the original general contractor was allowed to fix it. once again, I pat them on the back. I think that I'm not going to name them, even though I am very impressed with how they performed and how they came to the table and how they agreed to do the repairs. And they agreed to actually do the repairs themselves and hired subcontractors and took this money into the settlement and were able to then go ahead and fix the building. And the repairs are now completed and the building is fine. But it took a while. This whole process took 5 or 6 years to even get to the resolution point where the repairs had to begin. And the lawyers, meantime, were doing tolling agreements and doing other things to keep this thing at bay from going into formal litigation. A lot of these cases, 95+% of these cases, they settle. They don't actually go to trial. They settle outside of the trials, and the good attorneys are able to then arrange for settlements, and you get your money back. So that was that was very good. So any questions about this second case? No questions? Okay. I'm going to then go into the next step, which is the importance of doing a do-it-yourself inspections. Okay. Most of you have busy lives like we all do. COVID's made things even more impossible for us and for everybody. And the first thing that really, if you own new construction buildings that are less than 10 years old, you've got to do inspections. You've got to start with your own inspection. Okay, be very, very thorough about it. If you're seeing, like, instance, the last example, all they had seen were 2 instances where you could observe moisture behind the stone assembly in a storage closet up on the 4th level, right? So you open the door, you went behind it, you could see the open studs, you could see the veneer from the inside out, and only there they were able to see the water, nowhere else. And they knew that it was bad enough where they brought us in. Okay, so often what you see is the tip of the iceberg. Don't assume that if I have one tiny leak, that means I have just one leak. What I've seen, and I've seen thousands of these projects, a tiny leak is often 99.9% is the tip of the iceberg. It's the tip of the iceberg, okay? Because more than 95, 98, 99% of the leaks are hidden. They're concealed in the wall cavity. So what you're able to see is just a tiny fraction. If you see it, okay, bring it to attention of somebody like us that does this for a living, that does water intrusion, that does litigation type of assistance and forensic investigations, and have us look at it. Because for us to evaluate it and look at something quickly, what we often need is just photographs. You can email us photographs and talk to me, and I'll give you advice for free. I'll look at your photos, and I'll give you what I think you ought to do next, what you ought to look at next on the phone with the photographs, and I'll do that at no cost, and it won't take me very long anyway, because all I have to do is look at some pictures, the inside and the outside. So here's what you need to do, okay? You have to take lots and lots of photos, and you have to properly document things with a date stamp, right? So for instance, if there's hot water delivery issues, and most of your complaints and most of the time people complain about it is at 8 o'clock or between 8 and 9 in the morning. That's an important piece of information to know, that there's a rush hour. People are all trying to use hot water between 8 and 9 in the morning, and that's when the problems happen. Nobody else complains about it otherwise. Or if there's a leak, for instance, in this project, there was a leak, but it would only happen in a wind-driven rain event. Okay, so it was in the past project that we reviewed, the first one, I think that leak happened at Christmas time, right around Christmas time. It was a major storm in 2015, right around Christmas, and there was somebody, janitor or somebody in there, and the janitor noticed wet floors, wet carpet. Often, once again, a public building's not occupied at night. A lot of our rains happen at night. When you come in the morning, the buildings dry out. You don't see anything, right? And so often water will puddle on top of the window sill. And by the time, and there's shades and window coverings that cover it up. And it dries out in the morning when the sun comes out. So people will go in and look and say, hey, there's been a leak here because we see a stain. And we'll photograph that stain. And we know that historically it's probably leaked here before. But most people don't. They just expect the janitors to properly clean it to get the stains out. But they don't even know the building's leaking. So it helps to really look at it carefully, document everything thoroughly, take pictures of it. And if you're paying for some repairs on a new building that's less than 10 years old, save all your costs, save all your receipts, save your personal time it took to do something. Here's how I recommend documenting it. Okay, take overall shots. I showed you guys a bunch of overall shots of the building. And then on the overall shot, you can make a little mark and say, here's where the problem was. Then walk in the room where the leak is happening. Take an overall shot of the room where the leak is happening from the door. Then get close up to the window where the leak is actually taking place and take pictures of the window. Okay. So when I look at it, or when an expert looks at it, they know precisely what part of the building is leaking. The mistake that often people make is they take a lot of micro photos. That is the zoom in part. They don't take a lot of macro photos. So it's really important that you start with macro photos. For instance, you could take an overall Google shot, okay? And you could take a Google shot and you can, in Adobe Acrobat or in PowerPoint or whatever, or even Excel Word, you can mark up and say, I got a roof leak right here. Okay, and that's a good form of communicating the big picture to me or to anyone. Okay, and this is a macro shot, an overall shot. This is a macro shot. Okay, and it shows the overall elevation of the building. And if there's a leak down here at a curtain wall, then you can highlight that area and you can see leak at this location. Okay, and so doing something like this, even if they're hard copies that you marked up, or if they're photographs that you've digitally marked up, is really, really helpful. So these overall shots and macro shots are really helpful. The other thing that I do as a habit is that if I'm photographing, let's say, a leak stain in a hallway, I'm going to take a picture. On the right-hand side, there's a picture of a room number, okay? I'm going to take a picture of that room number first. And then I'm going to take a picture of this leak. Okay. So I know which room this leak is associated with. And if you're dealing with, offices, you're dealing with certain rooms, take a picture of the outside of the office to depict which room you're going in. Then you can have a map and you can say, see the map, the leak was in room 100. And now your pictures that you've taken side by side are of a unit 100 or a room 100 and the floor that's wet. Okay, and make sure that your camera is properly set and taking and recording the date and the time you're taking the picture. And iPhone, all of these devices, they accurately keep track of what time you took a picture. In fact, they keep track of where you took a picture on a GPS type of level, and Apple could tell you, what city you were in or what location you were in. Even an address, it'll actually record that. So those are good things, and make sure that those are actually shared with whomever you're giving this picture to. That here's a date stamp, here's a time stamp. And I'll often look at this, and then if this was associated with a rain event, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go online, punch up that date, punch up the city you were in, and see, okay, how much precipitation did I have? What was the wind speed that day, maximum wind speed that day, right? what direction the wind was blowing that day. So all of a sudden, with having a date and a time that the picture was taken, is giving me this amazing bit of information that I'm able to then piece things together very quickly. And if you send me these kinds of pictures, I promise that I will work with you guys to just give you some advice and guide you through this at no charge, just to help you on the phone. If you think you need to get me involved, get me out there and take a look at something, then yes, I do have to charge you. But if you just have a question about it and you just need to discuss it, take this type of pictures, okay, and feel free to send it to me or upload it to a box or Dropbox or something, and I'm happy to consult with you on something like this at no charge. So any other questions about this part? Okay, terrific. So in that case, I'm going to turn it over to Ritchie, and I'm going to let him talk about his perspective on this. Go ahead, Ritchie.
Thanks, Karim. Appreciate it. That was very thorough, and I learned a lot even, so that was great. Again, my name is Ritchie Lipson, and if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great, Karim. And maybe one more slide after that.
Well, I think I've already introduced Ritchie, and I just want to say that his firm and Ritchie and some of the lawyers I work with there are truly amazing. They're very knowledgeable people, very results-oriented people, and so I'm very impressed with them, and I'm happy to be jointly working to do this seminar just to get your legal perspective, Ritchie. Thank you. Go on.
So just a little bit about our firm. We have been in business doing construction defect work for 30 plus years. We have offices throughout California, Northern California, Los Angeles, Southern California. We're in Phoenix, we're in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and in Honolulu. Over that time frame, we've collected more than $1 billion for our clients. And like Karim said in the introduction, we handle all sorts of claims. We represent municipalities, school districts, commercial developers and contractor developers. And then we also represent homeowner associations and single family tracts as well. One unique thing about our firm is we also have a class action division. So we bring a lot of product related claims. Helps us in when we bring traditional construction defects. So next slide would be great. We have a couple of goals when we approach a case. The first one being that we want to make sure that our clients get a favorable resolution. Nobody wants to go through a construction defect claim more than one time. And so our firm really focuses on trying to make sure that not only do you get the best recovery if you go through a claim, but we prepare every claim so that you can maximize the time spent and the return that you get. And we prepare every case that goes to trial, but like Karim said, most of these claims get resolved at mediation, almost 95% of them. We push as fast as we can towards early resolution. And we'll talk a little bit about contingency too, and our firm generally works on contingency, and we'll talk a little about what that means for the district. So we talked a little bit about an implied warranty and what that means, and I want to go into that in a little bit more detail. So if you go to the next slide, Karim, that'd be great. So the implied warranty, there's certain types of claims. There's two ways to look at this. There is the causes of action, which are generally brought through negligence, through a breach of an express warranty that you're going to have in your contract. And that's what we're always talking about, that are usually 1 or 2 years. And then there is an implied warranty under the law, which develops through case law. And then there are time frames associated with each of those claims in which you can bring those causes of action. So we're going to talk about the different time frames that go with each particular type of claim. And the difference, the way I like to just describe this between the express warranty, that's what's in your contract. That's what says for 1 year, the contractor will warranty all his work, and you'll usually lay out what that warranty is. The implied warranty is an implied obligation under the law that's developed that says that the structure will be completed and designed in a reasonably workmanlike manner. And that's the real difference between express and implied warranty. Let's go to the next slide and talk about the specific statutes, Karim. There we go. So in California, when you bring a claim for negligence, and that's really a standard of care type of argument that the contractor, the subcontractor, the architect, the engineers, their work fell below a standard of care. That time frame to bring a claim for under negligence theory is 3 years in California. Then we talked about contractual warranties. You have a contract that might have express warranties in it. If you're going to bring a claim under a breach of contract theory, it's 4 years in California. Then the implied warranty is kind of divided into 2 different time frames. One is for patent or known defects, and the other one is for latent defects, so things you can't see. If they're open and apparent, a patent defect, the time frame to bring the claim is 4 years. The implied warranty that we're talking about, and we based this whole seminar on, is a 10-year limit for things you can't see. Now, the important thing to know in all this is that all these claims are really based on a discovery basis. So, for example, the latent defects, when you knew or should have known, the time frame starts ticking, and that's a limit of 3 years from discovery. So like Karim said, if you're doing inspections and you're noticing that you have water intrusion, there might be some issues that are already showing themselves in the building that are defective, and arguably, and this is a defense that the other side has, that they're going to start saying, well, you should have brought those claims within 3 years when you knew or should have known. So that's this continuing obligation, I like to call it, to inspect and review the quality of construction in your project, because the 3 years will start ticking when you knew or should have known. The outside time frame, though, is the 10 years for implied warranty for latent defects.
Understand that? Because it is somewhat complicated, and frankly, I have to admit that when I learned about it like 30 years ago, I struggled with understanding it all. And so the difference between the 3 year and the 4 year and implied and the patent versus latent. And so I know that Ritchie, you're an expert at it, and I'm just putting it back out there. Does anybody have questions about it? Because please ask.
Yeah, and it is complex, and I think that the message, though, the important message is that when you knew or should have known about issues, that time you're going to have time frames that are ticking, and those need to be addressed. Otherwise, you potentially could lose claims. On the flip side of that is any building that you have that's getting close to 10 years, you should be looking at it thoroughly, because there's no question that at the end of 10 years from substantial completion, you're going to lose all your claims. At that point, you're on your own, and you're not going to have any claims that can be brought. So that's the two things to keep in mind with all this. And then, who's on the hook for this? That's always an important question. Who can claims be brought against? And in California, whoever developed the project, the general contractors, subcontractors, architects, engineers, product manufacturers, and product suppliers all potentially have liability. If you want to go to the next slide, Karim, that'd be great. We talked a little bit about this oftentimes, and point number 3 is the key one we hear all the time, which is, your year's up. Your year's up, your 2 years are up. You're out of warranty, and you should have maintained the building, and hence your claims are no longer valid. And that's just not the case. So let's go on the next slide. And let's talk a little bit about how you approach contractors and and builders. I think Karim mentioned that, you know, sometimes small leaks can be the beginning of your claim. And it is always key, you know, when we get a call and there's a minor issue and a district's been dealing with challenges, the first thing we're going to do is call Karim's team in and have a thorough property condition assessment done so that we have a good list when we do approach the contractor. We know what the issues are. We know how extensive they are. We know what your claims are before we're approaching the developer or the contractor to see if they're willing to make repairs. So that's step one. You may have done that on your own, but we always like to bring in an expert team before we are formally going to approach the contractor to see if they're willing to make repairs. There we go, one more slide. So the first thing that happens when we get a call from a district is, again, we'll bring in an expert team to investigate the issues that are faced by the project, but also then to determine the validity of the claim. How widespread are the issues? How big is the claim? Because you know, if you have a claim that's a couple $100,000, obviously you're not going to need legal counsel to bring that claim. It's going to be for a larger size claim. That's the first thing we have to look at. What does the contract say? What type of insurance is out there? How long has it been? Are you outside the time frame to bring claims? We're going to look at all that, analyze that before we advise you as to what the right steps are. Then we'll usually do an initial notice of claim in writing to start the process going. That will usually trigger the insurance companies to be involved. Go ahead, whoops. There we go. Go ahead to the next slide after that. And then after that initial notice of claim, then depending if there's an arbitration provision or if we're going to litigate, if the claims can't be resolved through early resolution and negotiation directly with the contractor, the insurance carriers, then we'll file a formal claim. So when do you involve us? Well, if you think you have a problem, it's good to get us involved early. You know, the investigation that we do at the direction of our firm is privileged. It gets some protections down the road. So it's always good to get counsel involved early, especially construction defect counsel. We like to pride ourselves that we can help you guide you through the steps with Karim's input so that there's no mistakes made up front. Again, most of these claims get resolved early, but we again have to prepare them all as if we're going to trial. And the good news is that as we evaluate the validity of claim, we're going to take these cases almost all the time on contingency. And what that means for the school district is that there's no upfront expenses for the school district. There's no cost to retain us. There's no expert cost, and it shifts that risk of burden to the law firm. So we're taking the business risk to bring the claim. So if there was for some reason not enough insurance or some of the defenses, you know, we've never lost a claim, but let's assume there's a case where claims we can't bring the claims. Any of those upfront costs that we've incurred are not the district's. They're ours. They're ours, the law firm's burden. So.
Hey, Ritchie, there's a question
Sure.
from Carolyn, I think.
Yeah, and let's talk about, I think it's the next slide, but let's see go to the next slide. And so let's talk a little bit about the types of coverage. So there usually is a performance bond, and the performance bond, of course, is going to reference, it could be different timeframes. It's going to be a contractual obligation. It could reference the express warranties in the contract to begin with, or it could be a longer time frame.
Hey, Ritchie, I'm going to just read out the questions for everybody so people.
Yeah, sure. Please do.
Okay. So the question is, if you filed your notice to proceed and the bond is released. I think it meant notice to completion.
Yeah.
The bond is released.
Yeah.
Presumably the insurance as well. Where does the remuneration come from? Question mark. The
Yep.
GC's general liability? Question mark.
Yeah. So, and it's a great question. And so if the performance bond is not no longer a source of recovery, either because it doesn't cover the time frame that when you're bringing the claim, or it's completely released, then the general liability, the general contractor's CGL policies, whether it be an OSIP or a CSIP, depending on what kind of policy it is, that's where the source of recovery comes from. And those claims, the difference really generally is that the claims under the performance bond is for faulty construction based on the warranties in the contract. The CGL policies, the general liability policies, cover what we call resultant damage. So they don't cover defective work, they cover the damage that occurs from defective work. And that's how those claims are brought. So sometimes both policies might be in play, sometimes just the general liability policy. And if it's not a RAP policy or an OSIP policy or policy that covers everybody in the project, there might be different claims against all the policies that cover the different subcontractors. So it depends how the insurance company, the insurance is set up for the actual project. So I hope that answers that. Carolyn, did that answer that for you?
Well, I want to add to the questions. The other questions I've heard about this are something like, what if the contractor went out of business? Yeah. If he's out of business, do I still have a 10-year warranty? And what happens to my claim? What happens to the insurance? And I think, Ritchie, I'll let you get the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a good one. We get that a lot, and especially when if claims are against subcontractors, you see a lot of these guys go out of business over the years, and generally the policy is in play and on the risk for the time frame that if it has a completed operations provision in the clause, it's going to cover the project. It doesn't matter whether or not the underlying insured is out of business. So the policy still is at risk, and the claims can be brought. So we get that a lot. It happens all the time. And if it's an OSIP policy or a RAP policy that covers the entire project, then it clearly doesn't matter. But if the general's out of business or the subs are out of business, the policy still will cover the project. So it's a good question. So
any other questions? Ritchie's a great free attorney to ask questions for. I want to, I know that Khadija and Rachel went over how to ask questions, but if you hover your screen down at the bottom, you have a pop-up screen that comes up. And on the pop-up screen, you can click on a chat function and basically use that to chat with us. And if you want to speak to us and ask the question personally, you can ask us to sort of release the mute, and then you can actually verbally ask the question if you prefer that. But you should use your chat function to communicate questions, and so please ask us questions.
And I know we're going to talk a little about lessons that we've both learned. We've talked a lot about inspecting your building regularly, and I know you deal with universities and districts a lot more than I do, Karim, on a daily basis. But what I've found in our practice is that it depends on the size of the district, or the size of the entity. But a lot of times what we're finding is that the inspections are done by the maintenance division. And they're looking at it not on a more formalized basis. And I don't know if you found that same thing, Karim. And that's why when I meet people, I always ask them, are you doing any formal type of recurring property condition assessments? Are you looking at your project on a formal basis, maybe bringing in an outside third party? And I don't know, Karim, maybe you could weigh in on that. I think it's the most important thing if you have a large project. But
yeah, it's a very good point. And frankly, the people that are most likely to experience or to see or to observe a leak in a building are often janitors. And janitors are not there to communicate this to the owners, they typically don't. And you have different layers of building managers and facilities managers, and often people are not just walking the site all the time. And so the owner or the occupant of the building or the teachers or the professors or students sometimes have to complain about something, and only then is it taken up the chain of command. And often the education, we talked about this implied 10-year deal that you have up to 10 years if there's a problem that you can do this. But the people that are involved in inspecting, in observing, in experiencing a leak, in experiencing a problem, they haven't seen this seminar. They don't know it. Okay. So they're automatically saying, oh, my building is old. It was built 8 years ago. I have no say. I gotta call somebody for repair. A work order is immediately written. I have a leak in the roof. Go fix it. So it's often handled at a very low level where people don't really understand what the law, what the law has to offer. So that's been my experience.
We had one more question about, if a supplier, and I'm assuming that would apply to any contractor, keeps promising to make repairs or is attempting to make repairs, or could be all different scenarios. Does the statute get told or extended? And the 10-year and the 4-year claims are really hard deadlines from substantial completion. So you're going to have a hard time arguing that the statutes were told just because they were attempting to make repairs along the way. So I'd be leery of that. If you've got a situation where repairs are being agreed to or attempted, and you're coming up against one of those time frames, then it's time to get your counsel involved and see if you can negotiate a tolling agreement so that you don't lose any claims. So I hope that answered that.
Yeah, I've had occasions where, let's say a window manufacturer, they keep replacing the glass because the glass keeps fogging up, and it's fogging up far more often than it should. And it's clearly a defective IGU unit, or the insulated glass unit that defectively supplied to the job site. And it's cheaper for them to come out once a year and replace 2 pieces here and 5 pieces there. And they've been doing it for 9 years. Now we're seeing that this problem will continue to go on, and probably all the glass will fail because it's defectively built in the first place. What do you do? Is it covered now, or have you lost your warranty? And I think most of the times the lawyers find a way to continue that 10-year, and they say that you were relying on a manufacturer to make good on their warranty, and you didn't know it's a defective construction that's causing it, and in good faith you let him do this. So in effect, it can have the effect of tolling the warranty, not always, but so I would definitely, it's something you definitely discuss with the lawyer and talk to them about your situation.
Yeah, no question. And I think we had one more question. I have roof leaks in a building that was completed about 2 years ago. They were never really fixed, and just found out by the custodian. Contractor saying that we were past warranty. This just happened yesterday. So, again, that is a great summary of kind of the purpose of the seminar, is to let you know that it's that may be out of your express warranty, but you still have the implied warranty. So you clearly still have claims.
So now you have 4 years max, right? Because it's a patent defect. You already know about it. You already know it.
Right.
And so if I could give you some advice on your roofing issue, I would be surprised if not only do you have this 10-year implied warranty, but you probably also have either a 10 or 20-year roofing warranty. They're often part of the specifications that the architects put together. So the manufacturer of the roofing system may have provided a 10 or 20-year warranty, labor and material, leak-free warranty. So that could potentially be your avenue. The only problem with manufacturer's warranty is their obligation is extremely limited. The obligation is to fix and stop the leak. That's it, not to correct the defect. So they may come out with a bucket of mastic, wear gloves, stick their hand in the mastic, smear it over the leak, and walk away. That's their obligation. So if you have a leak, you should have it looked at by someone that knows what they're doing, and make sure that if the repair is needed, that they're putting enough pressure on the manufacturer to repair it correctly, especially if it's a one-off issue. So I would, you most definitely have coverage. 2 years is brand new, really, and you should definitely do something about it.
I think we got time for maybe one more question. If anybody has any additional questions, we're glad to take them. And otherwise.
So basically, the reply I got back from this individual is that they're saying it's a mechanical equipment that's leaking on the roof, or the leak is caused by mechanical equipment. And that might be the case. You may have a mechanical unit that's leaking, especially since we haven't had rain in the last couple of days. We had some sprinkles last week. And if it in fact is the mechanical equipment that's leaking, it's still covered. You still have the 10-year warranty, implied warranty. It just happens to be the mechanical contractor who's on the hook. But more importantly, your general contractor is on the hook. Your GC is on the hook for 10 years. And so I would, give me a call, give Ritchie a call, talk to any of us, or send us an email. I don't have a phone number in here, but I should put one in here in case you want to call me directly. But please email us and send us some pictures. If you send me some pictures of your leak, both from the rooftop and from down below where the leak is, and email it to me, I promise to call you back and talk to you about it. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Terrific. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time today.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.